Express is really great at helping you build a server using JavaScript, but to create truly dynamic applications, your server needs to be able to have two-way communication with clients. So in this movie, I'll show you how to start building an API to go ahead and show feedback that has been entered by the form. And we need some sample feedback, and to get that, I'm going to go to this URL. So what I'm going to do is click on this raw button and then grab this data. This is sort of sample data that you'd see if somebody had filled out the form a couple of times. And then I'm going to come back here and let's leave this about that big. In my editor, I'm going to go to my data folder and create a new file. I'll call it feedback.json, paste that in there. And now I have some data that I should be able to display in my application. All right, so next up, we need to create our API route. So in the routes folder, I'm going to make a new file, call it api.js. And this is going to be pretty similar to what we've done before with routes. So I'm going to copy this feedback.js route and paste it right here. And what's going to be different about this route is that it's not going to get a render statement like this. So we're going to just go ahead and retrieve the data file. So after we get this router, we're going to say var feedback equals require data feedback.json. So that reads that data into the file that I called feedback. And once I have it in there, I can execute a GET request on this API path or the API route. And all I'm going to do here is go ahead and issue a response with a JSON version of that feedback data. Go ahead and call that feedback data. I think it would make more sense. And that's pretty much all you need in order to create an API that when somebody goes to this URL is going to spit back this data in feedback.json. Let's go ahead and save this and go to my application. And instead of feedback, I'm going to type in API. And before I do that, I have to do one more thing. Go to app and, of course, make sure that I add that in the list of routes. So that should be API. We'll save that. And then I'm going to come over here and refresh. And there it is. Now, whenever I go to this URL, I get the list of messages from that JSON file. So a couple of interesting things here. Notice that data isn't publicly sort of generated. So there is no way of accessing this feedback.json file directly. We can only access it through the routes. And right now you may be thinking, well, that's sort of weird because why don't I just add that data directly on the page? What we want to do is go ahead and write a JavaScript function that lets people manage what's on this file. So I'm going to create a JavaScript document with some code that is going to take care of bringing that data into a page. So for that, we're going to need to go into the public folder. And then in our JavaScript folder, we're going to create a new file. We'll call this feedback.js. And in here, I'm going to use jQuery. It's installed with my Bootstrap installation, and it makes it a little bit easier to handle AJAX requests, which is how we're going to get the data in the page. So I'm going to start by using the $sign variable, creating a function that makes this piece of code load whenever the page has loaded. And then in here, I'm going to use the getJSON method from jQuery to call my API route. And once it gets the data from my API route, it's going to run a function, which I'll need to create, called update feedback. And so that right there gets the data using my route, right? And then it's going to execute a function. And of course, I'll need to create that. So that's going to be function update feedback. And that function is going to receive some data from the JSON request. And what I want to do here is create a variable called output. And let's set it to nothing at the beginning of this. And then I can use the each method of jQuery, right, to go ahead and process that data through a function and pass it along two variables, key and item. This is something that jQuery is going to give me automatically, these two variables. Whenever I call the each statement, it's sort of like a for each loop in JavaScript. It's going to go through the data, and each piece of data is going to be placed in a variable called item, and it's also going to generate a key. And I'm going to need both of those. So what I need to do now is just bring in some basic HTML. Let's get rid of this space here, maybe a couple of these. We'll leave one space right there. So now what I want to do is really just bring in a bunch of regular HTML that's going to take our item information and sort of wrap it around some HTML code. So I've got another gist, and I'm going to go ahead and once again click on raw to copy all this. And I'm going to copy this right here and then go back into my JavaScript function. Let's go ahead and paste that information. It looks like this really belongs to the previous line. And so I'm going to turn off soft wrap, because what I want to do is actually create or take that output variable and use it in every one of these lines. So I'm going to say output plus equals, and then I'll put a quotation here. And then at the end of each one of these, I'll put a quotation and a semicolon. All right. And then let's see, I'm going to just tab these in, these output sort of signs. And let's try this. Tab a couple of times. That looks pretty good. So this is almost perfect, except that now I need to use my variables here. So right here where I have a div with a class of feedback title, I'm going to insert item.title, the variable from this each statement right here. And then I want to put in the message. So it'll be kind of like this, but it's going to be the item message. All right. So what's going to happen here is my output variable is going to get populated with a copy of this HTML for each one of the items. And what I want to do is after that, I want to go ahead and locate the element with a class of feedback messages, and then modify the HTML so that it matches my output variable. So all this stuff is going to get output to the element with this class right here. And that is, let's go ahead and save this. That's going to be in my feedback file. So here's where the feedback messages are going to get inserted, right, by my code. So what I want to do now is make sure that I load up this script, but I need it to only go on this page. And this is the feedback page, of course. So in the feedback route, let's open up the feedback route again. I'm giving this page a page ID of feedback. So what I can do is in my views, I have in the partials template, I have another file called JS defaults, right? And I showed you before how I can load something conditionally. So what I can do here is go ahead and load feedback.js, but only if the page ID is equal to feedback. And so that way I'm not going to get an error in other pages. So let's save that. And if we did everything right, we should be able to go back. Let's go back to our page and click on feedback. And we should be seeing our list of items here. Let's make sure that we saved everything. And just in case, let's inspect for errors. See if we did something wrong here. I see a console error. So it looks like getJSON is not defined. And the reason that's happening is probably because jQuery is not loading. That's odd. Oh, I know what that is. So the problem is I should have put a period before the getJSON command. So actually this needs to have a period right there. Silly me. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And now you can see the meeting time and the great speaker messages are right here. Let's go ahead and clear the errors out. It's not good to have JavaScript errors. Whenever you're working with jQuery or JavaScript, if something happens, you can check the console in your browser, because now what we're doing right now is making sure that when somebody comes to this page, the page itself is going to execute a feedback.js script. And that script is going to call our API route, which returns the information from the data file. And that's going to call this file here called feedback.json. So it seems a bit complex because normally we would just read that file from a easily accessible place within our site. But by doing it this way, you're going to see that we'll be able to write things and dynamically update that list as users type in information into the form.